All right, Nick, let's talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers, the new look, new attitude Pittsburgh Steelers at that. They're doing so many things differently in just the course of a year and a half than they have traditionally done. I think this is a Steelers team who's really making a change, and I think it's evident in some of the changes they made how effective they're going to be. Specifically, we can look at a discussion between Jalen Warren and Cam Hayward. Let's get into this article and we'll talk more about exactly what's going on the other side. This is from NBC Sports. It says, here's what running back Jalen Warren recently said about Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. He said, it's a night and day difference with their leadership, Warren said on Cameron Hayward's podcast via ESPN.com. They bring a lot. They help out. They tell us to run the route, and they're really on it when you don't run it a certain way. They're big on details, kind of what we preach, and it helps out a lot. Nick, I think this is big because this certainly was not the case last year with the quarterbacks on the Steelers team. I think there was more infighting, more wondering who was going to be the starter. Just not the level of maturity and leadership that a guy like Justin Fields and Russell Wilson bring to the table here for the Steelers. They just want to be here and do their best. I'm curious what your thoughts are, but Steelers fans, in the comment section below, now that we've had some time to sit, the draft has passed, we've seen some of these draft picks that the Steelers got to analyze them. Who truly is your favorite draft pick for the Steelers, or even an undrafted free agent at that as well? Who do you think is going to be the biggest hit of this draft season for the Steelers? Let us know in the comment section below. But Nick, what are your thoughts on these comments by Jalen Warren about the new Steelers quarterback duo?
I think it's absolutely an outstanding sign, because I think if you look at the Kenny Pickett era, or maybe Kenny Pickett error, we should call it, well, it was clear, even though Pickett had some physical deficiencies, that one of the things that he shouldn't have had was lack of leadership and maturity, right? That was one of his biggest strengths, supposedly, coming out of Pitt, and he obviously failed the team as a leader, right? I think that's fair to say. And I think you can put part of the blame on, of course, the offensive coordinator and offensive coaching staff, but the reality, the quarterback position is set up as such that the buck stops with you. You have got to be the leader, you've got to be the grown-up, you've got to be the mature person in the room, you've got to command respect, right? It's one of those weird things where we always want to talk about arm talent and things like that in the quarterback position, but if you look at the all-time greats, Unitas, Montana, Staubach, you go to recent guys like Brady, Manning, right? They all had incredible leadership dynamics and were very strong vocal presences in the locker room and on the practice field and on the game field as well, correcting players, getting them on the right path, being those leaders. And I think that was one of the underrated decisions that the Steelers made in terms of bringing in both Wilson and Fields, because both have strong leadership credentials, different leadership credentials and different leadership styles. But no one can say that Russell Wilson is not a guy who wants to be a leader and tries to be a leader. For whatever Justin Fields' flaws were in Chicago, leadership, maturity, being a grown-up, being the man in the room, being the alpha was not one of those things. So the Steelers, obviously, they got better physically at the quarterback position in terms of talent with both Wilson and Fields. People forget that they also got a lot better in terms of leadership, and that dynamic is critically important. There's a reason that the Steelers were even winning late in the Ben Roethlisberger era, even as Roethlisberger's tool set began to decline physically. It's because he was still the alpha. He was the leader. He was the guy that got everybody on the same page, heading in the right direction. There's a reason that Peyton Manning, at 20% of his arm talent, goes to the Denver Broncos, and they win a lot of games, and they go on to win a Super Bowl. They go to a second Super Bowl as well, right? There's a reason Tom Brady, literally the guys that was in his mid-40s, won another Super Bowl and took the Buccaneers to a number of playoff opportunities, even though he was a shell of his former self physically. It's because he had the leadership skills, right? That was one of the things that was critically missing from the Pittsburgh Steelers over the past couple of years. And the fact that these new Steelers, these quarterbacks are off to such a great start, I think is a great sign. And I really love the fact that playmakers like Warren are coming out and saying it, because that means that it's really propagated throughout the locker room and propagated throughout the rest of the team, and everybody has to be impressed with the leadership traits from these two new quarterbacks.
Yeah, Nate, and this reminds me of something really interesting. I was watching one of PFF's podcasts a couple weeks ago before the draft, and they were just talking about the Commanders and something that the Commanders did. I know this is surprising that we're talking about something the Commanders did, but right before the draft, something interesting they did was take all of the top quarterback prospects, guys they were looking for, and they took them all to Top Golf, and they saw how these guys interacted with each other. And what they said, they thought was happening and what they were looking for is who did people gravitate to? Who was, like you said, the alpha? Who was the guy that, that showed the leadership abilities and really took charge in a room of prospects that all of those guys had the opportunity to be, the leader of that room. And obviously they ended up selecting Jaden Daniels, which leads to believe that he is that kind of guy. And I could buy into that. But this brings me to my point is, like you said, with Roethlisberger, with Wilson, with Justin Fields, if you were to bring these guys on into a social setting and you had a group of Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, and Mason Rudolph, or a group of Ben Roethlisberger, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, accolades aside as far as that, just personality-wise, I feel like people would gravitate more towards the guys like Wilson, the guys like Fields, definitely a guy like Roethlisberger, than they would guys like Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, and Mason Rudolph, purely because they don't have those attributes that we were talking about. They're not strong leaders. They're not the alpha when they're in the room. They're not out there on the field, correcting guys, doing stuff like that. It just didn't show through in anything they did, really. But you look at guys like Wilson and Fields specifically, these are guys who really just, you gravitate towards them. They have great personalities, great leadership ability. The talent's always been there. It's just getting them into where Wilson, he just needs to get back to where he was. And Fields, he just needs to be in a system that allows him to be a little bit more successful. So I think that these are just really great signs, and it makes sense when you think about it in the aspect of, just bringing people out into a social setting and see who people gravitate towards more. It's obvious there would be more like a guy like Fields or Wilson than it would be like guys like Pickett, Trubisky, or Rudolph.